Okay, I think we're connected. We'll be starting in less than a minute. Okay. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato sama sambuddhasa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato sama sambuddhasa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato sama sambuddhasa. Okay, so this evening I'm going to conclude the series on the Four Noble Truths, and we have been for the last several weeks working through the Eightfold Noble Path, and we're down to the last path factor today, which is Samadhi, which is defined in the expansion of the path factors as the four jhanas: first jhana, second jhana, third jhana, fourth jhana. So I'd like to begin by talking a bit about what is meant by the word samadhi. This is most often translated as concentration, and I really do not like that translation. I try to keep away from using it. I generally just leave the word untranslated. Um, the definition in the old texts like the Visuddhimagga and the Abhidhamma, when samadhi is defined, it's defined as stability of mind, stillness. One phrase that's used is non-wavering. So this is quite different than concentration. And I see in people who um, are beginning meditators, a common mistake is that they're too forceful with the mind. They try and push the mind onto the object, and they try and narrow the mind down um, to focus in on the object, like in a narrow kind of beam. I think this is entirely the wrong approach. I think it's wearying to the mind, and the person is not able to sustain the practice. Samadhi should feel bright and alert and awake, and the mind is not narrow but is expansive. It's wide open, but it's filled with a single object. It's not moving. It's not going from object to object. So it's good to think of the mind as a vast open space, and you're trying to fill that space with the object. It's better to think of letting the object fill the mind rather than putting the mind on the object. Now let the mind be still and let the object come to you. You know, with breath meditation, I think a good kind of visual image or metaphor is you imagine the mind is this vast open space, and the breath is the waves of the ocean filling up this vast space to the exclusion of everything else. So when one is practicing samatha meditation, which is the meditation that requires the depth of samadhi and leads into the jhanas, the skill to be learned is the skill of non-attention. That is, anything else which arises to the mind other than the chosen object, whether it's the breath or a mantra or the kasina, anything else that arises to the mind, one must learn the art of disregarding it, letting it fade away by non-attention. Not to show any interest, even a negative interest. Like, don't get upset by the fact that your mind is throwing up daydreams or what have you. Just disregard them and let them fade away into the background. And the quality of samadhi comes through as a great stillness of the mind, a great stability. With the rock of Gibraltar, it's not moved by the waves, it's steady. In the definition, as I said, in the expansion of the Eightfold Path, mentions the four jhanas as right samadhi. I think this is significant. Some modern commentators will tell you that the jhanas are not important; they're secondary. It's not an essential part of the path. But this is not the way the Buddha taught. Developing of samadhi and the jhanas was central to his teaching. It's embedded right in the Four Noble Truths, here in the definition of the Eightfold Path of Sama Samadhi. It's also significant that whenever in English you see English renditions of the translations of the Pali Canon, if you see the verb to meditate, he meditates, so forth, it's usually translating the verb janeti, which could be rendered as to do jhana. So to do jhana is synonymous with meditation. Now, the topic of the jhanas is a big one, and if you are widely read, if you read different teachers and different writers, or you listen to many talks by different teachers about the jhanas, you can often get frustrated because nobody seems to agree with anybody else. Of all the areas in Buddhist teachings, we find the most kind of divergence between individual traditions and individual teachers in the area of jhana meditation. So, the first thing is not to let yourself get frustrated by that. Everybody is trying to express what they understand mostly from their own experience, and there will be quite a bit of differences. So I'll say from my own perspective, and take this, as you will. This is my the way I choose to interpret it. I prefer to see the passage of the mind into and through the jhanas as a spectrum or a continuum. As there is a continuing deepening of samadhi, and not these neatly defined states, as you could be led to believe by a superficial reading. I think that one fades into the other, so to say. So this accounts for a lot of the discrepancy between different teachers, because if you imagine the passage of deepening samadhi as a spectrum, the definition of what constitutes first jhana or second jhana, for example, is somewhat arbitrary, where we put the signposts. And someone may put the signposts a little further back and some a little further forward. But it's still the same road or the same spectrum where you're just getting deeper and deeper samadhi. The passage through the jhanas is best understood in terms of the 5 factors and the 5 nivaranas. The nivaranas are the hindrances or diversions that keep us from deepening our samadhi, and they must be overcome in order to enter jhana. Now, I think that absence of the nivaranas in the mind could be considered almost a synonym with jhana, that the mind naturally settles into jhana, which is another point to bear in mind, that we're not speaking, when we talk about the jhanas, we're not talking about some very esoteric attainment that's something additional to the ordinary mind. It is the ordinary mind in its more basic primordial state. It's the more natural state of mind. The state of mind of the ordinary person in samsara, the unenlightened worldling, the wandering in samsaric existence, is very complex and very confused. And there's a bombardment of sense impressions. There's a constant turmoil of sense desires and fears, and the mind is very complex and very mobile. And as you go deeper into samadhi, the mind becomes quieter and simpler, becomes more purified and simpler. What's happening is layers of complication are being shed. It's not something new that's being discovered or added. It's just you peel away the obstructions, and then here it is, the more natural mind. In Tibetan Buddhism, they have the analogy of the mind is like the clear blue sky, and it can be obstructed by dark clouds. But the dark clouds are not the fundamental reality. Behind the clouds, the blue sky is always shining. So it's the mind is naturally luminous, as it says in the Anguttara Nikaya. The chitta is inherently luminous, pabhasara. So what we're doing with the jhana meditations is settling the mind into its more natural primordial state before all the complications of the sense desire realm are added in. So the 5 nivarana are sense desire, ill will, sloth and torpor, anxiety, and skeptical doubt. And these represent ways the mind is moving around, losing the thread. You know? And when these are not present, the mind, as I say, naturally settles into deeper samadhi. So when you're trying to develop meditation, be on alert for these. Now, for example, with the first one, the sense desire, we're not talking just about obvious, the mind running off into sexual fantasies or something. I mean, that's an obvious gross form of it. But any movement of the mind towards taking an interest in the objects of the senses, it might be as simple as wanting to sit more comfortably, or then ill will can arise if say the temperature in the room is too hot or too cold, and all these things represent going out through the senses, taking an interest in the sense impressions, and that as long as you're going out through the senses, you won't deepen into samadhi. this is any kind of interest in the senses for diversion or comfort or amusement will obstruct the jhana. You won't progress. You know? That's why on a meditation retreat, if one is seriously trying to develop meditation over an extended period of time, it's a very good idea to take the 8 precepts and keep them quite strictly, because the additional precepts in the 8 are renunciant precepts that block off avenues by which we amuse ourselves through the senses or divert ourselves. You know? For example, the precept against eating in the afternoon. And you take that on, then for half the day, you're not going to be able to just divert yourself through the sense of taste. Just have a little snack. You cut that off. So you're trying to go inwards and not outwards through the senses. So when the 5 hindrances are absent from the mind, when they're made quiescent, then it's possible that the mind will deepen samadhi to the point that we call first jhana, which is separated to a large degree from the sense bases and is marked by the 5 factors: vitakka, vichara, piti, sukha, and ekaggata. And it's worth talking a bit about the definitions of these. Vitakka and vichara go together as closely related factors. Vitakka is the initial movement of the mind towards the object, and vichara is the steady holding of the object. So together they represent the energies that manipulate objects in the mind. And outside of samatha meditation, in ordinary waking consciousness, they are the energies that manipulate objects in the mind, allowing for thought and speech. So when vitakka and vichara are still present in the mind, there's still some thought formation. So first jhana is not free completely of thought formation. Piti and sukha are 2 forms of pleasant feeling that arise from deep meditation. Piti is often translated as rapture. Sometimes it's translated as joy. It's a thrilling kind of happiness that has resonance in the body. It's actually technically a mental state. It's a refined kind of vedana, but it does have this effect on the body. So you will feel correlated sensations, physical sensations in the body, like spine rushes or goosebumps, tingles. The highest form of piti is the uplifting piti, when the body feels so light it feels like you're floating. The energy of piti is very energizing and refreshing and healing. It may have some relation to concepts in other systems like chi or kundalini. The Buddha, in one sutta, he uses a metaphor for piti as if you have a mountain with a lake on the top of the mountain, a small lake, and no rain falls into the lake and no streams flow into it, but the water is constantly refreshed by an upsurge of a fountain from below. So there's this image of the water flowing upwards from the depth. Now, piti gives way eventually to sukha. Sukha is is happiness, pure happiness as a feeling. It's often translated as bliss. It's a very refined, kind of oceanic kind of happiness, a sense of joy, of well-being. It has no uh, thrilling aspect, and it has no physical correlate except that the body feels completely at ease and there's a sense of well-being. In first jhana, piti and sukha are not very strong. They're not particularly evident yet. Uh, and the fifth factor that runs right through all the jhanas is ekagata, often translated as one-pointedness, but I think I have the same objection to this as I do to the word concentration. It implies a narrowing of mind to a point, and it's not really what's meant. It means unity of mind, a unification, that the mind is not divided into chasing after different objects, but is unified upon the chosen object of the breath or whatever it might be. Now, what happens? Okay, we've got as far as first jhana, and there's a separation from the senses, but the senses are not completely gone. They're remote, but they're the thing that has just been abandoned, so they're not very far away. So there's a saying that sound is a thorn to first jhana, meaning that a loud, sharp sound can, unless the meditator is very good, the loud, sharp sound or a sudden noise will often pull the mind out of the jhana by the mind taking an interest again in the objects of the senses, in this case sound. So as soon as you're taking interest in the senses, you lose the jhana. Then if the mind is stabilized in that jhana, gradually vitakka and vichara begin to seem coarse. Now the mind has reached a subtle state by abandoning the hindrances and moving away from the senses. It's become more subtle, more refined. And the factor that remains, which is the most coarse, is vitakka vichara, manifested as particularly as thought formation. So that becomes more and more subtle and more quiet, and eventually it's abandoned, and then we experience what's called second jhana, which is free of thought formation. It has only the factors of piti, sukha, and ekagata. And here piti is predominant. This is the jhana where piti is the most obvious factor. But now piti is now of all the factors present in the mind, piti is the most coarse and begins to feel gross and heavy and undesired by the mind. The mind is seeking now more subtlety, and it begins to rely more and more on bliss, on sukha. And eventually the piti fades away and is absent, and then we call it third jhana, which has the two factors only of sukha and ekagata. But eventually even bliss starts to seem coarse, and the mind wants an even more peaceful state, and the bliss is replaced by upekkha, or equanimity, a profound peacefulness of the mind. And this is the fourth jhana, ekagata and upekkha. So let's look at that sequence. What we're seeing continually is a movement from the coarse to the subtle, and we're seeing a removal of factors, a simplification. So there's a purification and a simplification. The most complicated state is the ordinary state of the mind, which is the for a human being, our default ordinary consciousness is classed as being on the level of sense experience. Once we're into first jhana, we've translated that to the level of form. And this has a correspondence in the cosmology. The level of sense experience is the kama bhumi, is the human realm, the deva realm, animals, and etc. It's a very wide, diverse, complicated realm with some pleasure, some pain, but everything is dominated by the five senses. The next level up is the realm of form, the rupa bhumi, which is where the Brahma gods dwell. And the Brahma gods are said to have equivalent consciousness to the jhanas, and they occur in these different levels, the first, second, third, and fourth level of Brahma gods. And their consciousness is equivalent to the jhanas. And what we can take from this is, first of all, a point of interest is that to return to what I said about the definition of samadhi as not being concentrated, the mind of a Brahma god is vast and wide open. It's said that a Brahma can contemplate 10,000 world systems as easily as a man can hold seeds of sesame in the palm of his hand and observe them. So it's a vast, wide open mind. It's not a narrow, concentrated mind. And when we're in first jhana, we have our consciousness it's not the same as a Brahma god consciousness. There are differences, but it's an equivalency. And we've transformed out of the sense desire realm. So we've basically shed a huge chunk of samsara. We're not liberated. We haven't escaped samsara, but we've simplified the situation. We've removed this whole complicated layer behind. And I think this is one of the benefits of experiencing jhana, is to experience the mind beyond sense desire. And then that will give us a new perspective and a new understanding of our ordinary mind, when we emerge from jhana and go back about our business. It's like if you live in a town or a village at the bottom of a mountain, and you think you know the village quite well, you know all the streets and so on. But one day you climb the mountain and look down on the village, you get a brand new perspective of it, a new understanding. And when you return back to the village, it's never quite the same for you. So, this is the one of the ways in which the cosmological model helps us to understand the jhanas. Another point here is the myth of the origins of the human race in the Aganya Sutta, is that the beings from the Abhasara Brahma realm descended to earth and got entangled in materiality by tasting the foam on the surface of the sea. And then they devolved into humans over several stages. So in this mythological sense, John, if we take the mind of the Abhasara second level Brahmas as the equivalent of second jhana, jhana is not something new that we're building. It's something very old and primordial that we're trying to remember. It's a primordial state of being that underlies the complexities of the sense desire existence. It is actually a more natural, basic, primordial state of mind. And that's what we're trying to do, or what we should be trying to do in samatha meditation, is simplifying and purifying the mind. give up any kind of model of going someplace or accomplishing something. You're shedding layers of complexity and experiencing a more natural state of mind. And this is, I think, the most useful, practical way of understanding samadhi, samatha meditation, and the jhanas. Okay, so I'll stop there, and we'll see what we have in the chat. Is that the ancient path that the Buddha claims to have found? In part, yes. I mean, it also includes the path that he found. Also, is the path of wisdom that we call a vipassana that leads to enlightenment. But this is all part of it. Yeah, the question you should hold the questions really until after the talk is finished, because it's then they get lost in that's one thing, is you should be listening rather than writing questions, but the other thing is they get lost in the back of the chat, and I'm only looking forward on the chat. You said in another talk Ajahn Mun could read minds. Is this something a person specifically trains for, or is it a natural result of being an arahant? It's neither, really. It's one of the abhinyas, or psychic powers, and they can arise spontaneously with someone who has doesn't even have to be an arahant, but usually with deep meditation, with development of the jhanas, the abhinyas can arise, but they don't necessarily. There are arahants who do not have these kind of psychic powers, and there are people who are not arahants who do. Why would Brahmas care for sense experience if they were already content? They don't. They don't. They're not interested in sense experience. If you're thinking of the Abhasara beings that descended to Earth, they were already kind of falling from that state, from the Brahma state, or they wouldn't have had that desire arise to taste the earth substance. And there are, I also could say more generally, we can see, for example, in the extended biography of Baka, the Brahma Baka, that we find in the commentaries, going beyond what's written in the sutta. If we go into the commentaries, it talks about his past lives, and he had been a higher level Brahma, starting at the fourth or level Brahma, Vihapala realm. But the desire for bliss arose in his mind, and he fell from that realm and became a third level Brahma, and so on. And I think you can see this in your own experience in meditation. Someone can be in a very deep state of meditation and then still fall from it through a corruption in the mind, a desire for some coarser experience. I am curious who Sakyan is. I keep seeing this name in the suttas. Do you mean Sakya or Saka? I'm not sure. Sakyan, I don't recognize as such. Saka was the king of the gods, and Sakya is the name of the tribe or clan that the Buddha was born into. So it's quite different. I'm not sure what you mean by Sakyan. Do you agree with Bhikkhu Sujata's argument in A History of Mindfulness that the Satipatthana Sutta is more about samatha than vipassana? And if not, why not? I think I don't really agree with that. I think the Satipatthana Sutta It has some, particularly in the first section about mindfulness of breathing, it does have some element of samatha, but it's mostly about vipassana, because it's mostly about observing mind states and observing the condition and state of the body. I think it's meant to be a kind of full program of meditation, and with an emphasis on the vipassana. Is getting psychic powers just a matter of having the karma for it? To a large degree, yeah. Um, and there are even cases that of people who have some degree of psychic power without any meditation. They just spontaneously uh, arise. But uh, more often, it's a combination. You have the karma for it, and then you develop and refine the mind so that that karma can express itself. Uh, I thought a long time of becoming a monk, but I suspect the discipline and difficulty might be too much for me. Such radical change gives me fear and anxiety. Is monkhood necessary? Um, no. Monkhood is necessary to become an arahant, I would say, but you can become a sotapanna as a layperson, and it's it's probably better to be a good layperson than to be a bad monk. Like if you become a monk with mixed feelings and you're not content with it, you probably would have been better off not doing that. Question. Yeka means one, agra means top. Can the meaning of ekagata be top? Yeka means one, agra means top. Can the meaning of ekagata be topmost importance? It's possible. See, the problem with translating a word like that is it's a poly compound. Uh, and poly compounds can be broken down in different ways. Um, so ekagata has been translated as one pointedness, um, but it could also be broken down to mean gone to unity, and I think that's the real. It's certainly the more useful meaning for practice. And I think it's grammatically defensible. Would begging be considered right livelihood for non-monastics? Um, it's not a forbidden trade. I don't see it's not a wrong livelihood. Like any livelihood, it would depend on how it's. I don't see it's not a wrong livelihood. Like any livelihood, it would depend on how it's conducted. If you were an aggressive beggar bothering people, that could be considered wrong because um, and we see that sometimes, but if you just make yourself available for receiving alms, it's not a wrong livelihood. There's actually some benefit to, because you're making an opportunity for other persons to make merit by donating. Does Theravada tradition have Mahasamadhi? Would you or Ajahn Sumedho know how to commit Mahasamadhi if you wanted to? Mahasamadhi, I'm not sure what you mean by that. I take it from the context. It's not. It doesn't sound like something we have in our tradition. It sounds like some kind of suicide. So no, we don't do that in our tradition. Does a layperson have to be practicing sexual abstinence in order to enter jhana? Um, I think that it definitely helps, and if for a period of time when one is if one is doing extended meditation, it 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 would be a great asset to take the eight precepts, which would include celibacy. for that period of time. Um, the mind, when one is practicing meditation, the mind has to be separated from the senses, and sexuality is of course one of the, or probably the most entangling form of sensuality. It's certainly not the only one, but it's a very strong one, and probably the most difficult one, the most problematic one. Uh, why do monastics have their names changed? Does it go back to the Buddhist time? Well, whenever the traditions vary from place to place. When a monk ordains, he's given a Pali name. It's a tradition that uh, goes very far back. I see in the stories in the Buddhist time, the monks' names were not always changed, but sometimes they were. But we're given a Pali name at ordination as part of the procedure. Often monks don't use their Pali names very much. They'll like Ajahn Chah. Cha was his ordinary common name. His Pali name was Bodhidhyana, and you'll only see it in very rare usages, like in a book of his teachings. He'll be identified as Ajahn Chah Bodhidhyana. Do you agree some teachers' opinion that the four satipatthanas are bases where the Buddha taught dry insight? Um, it could be, although there is the first section of the Satipatthana Sutta dealing with breath meditation does seem to be samatha. So I wouldn't really call it dry insight, but I think that the main thrust of that sutta is vipassana practice. Sorry, I'm taking these questions a bit out of order because the the scrolling on this thing jumped on me, but I'm going back now and got it back to a proper order, I think. Okay, just to tell, I'm reading biography of Ajahn Chah, and he tells an experience of jhana. He tells the one he feels the urge to meditate, and the sound doesn't bother him anymore. Yeah, okay, that sounds like it's still there, but he becomes separated. Yeah, that sounds like definition of first jhana, because the meditator is beginning to become separated from the senses, and the senses are become remote. You you can't say they're completely cut off. Buddha says one who masters the iddhipadas can live for a kappa. How do we master the iddhipadas to do this? Okay, this passage has been discussed a lot, and it hinges on what the Buddha meant by a kappa. And the commentary takes the position that he doesn't mean a world kappa, doesn't mean like till the end of the world. A kappa, in its more general sense, just means an extent of time that could be applied as to a human being. Then it's qualified as an ayu kappa, a lifespan. So the Buddha would, according to the commentary, what the Buddha was saying was that he could, with his mastery of the iddhipadas, he could live for a full human lifespan, which was defined as being 100 years, but not doesn't mean till the end of the world. It seems unlikely that he would do that, to live to the end of the world, that it would even be possible. One objection that's made in the commentary is that if the Buddha were to extend his life to the end of the world, he would still be alive when Metteyya Buddha came, and it's not possible for there to be two Buddhas in the same world system. Doesn't the radio waves model of consciousness go against Orthodox Buddhism? Since Buddhist says consciousness only arises due to a cause. No, I don't see how it violates that. I mean, it's when I use that, you're referring probably to something I said in a previous talk that I was talking about the relationship of brain and mind, and I was saying I don't think brain generates the mind, but it perceives the mind like it perceiving a radio wave. So it's not beyond cause. I was just using it in that narrow context of trying to understand the relationship between mind and brain. I have heard Ajahn Chah said that if you're a monk, you don't reach stream entry in 6 months, you wasted your time. You agree with this? I don't know. I hadn't heard Ajahn Chah say that, but it doesn't sound. It sounds like something he might have said as a way of encouraging diligence in the monks. I understand taking life under any circumstances breaks the precepts due to the intention to do so. But does the intention to do so in order to preserve others, e.g., a soldier fighting to defend helpless people in a war, count as good karma? No, it's complicated. It's more complicated than that. A lot of actions are classed as mixed karma, and it's not possible to kill a human being without incurring bad karma in any circumstance. But it can be a mixed karma, as you say, defending someone else. The practice of a warrior is a difficult one to remain ethical. And this was recognized by the Buddha. But there's no exception to the first precept. Any killing is bad karma, and to be to keep pure ethics and be to keep the first precept purely, and to one would have to not become a soldier in the first place and put yourself in that situation. Would you ever consider going into Samadhi on a mountain for 300 years in case Buddha's true teachings are lost and you can bring them back? There's a claim that somebody did that once. One of the early Buddhist schools made that claim. I think it's probably too late. For a layperson, is it beneficial to enter jhana before death? Yes, certainly. It'll tend to give you a higher rebirth. There's a record within Northern Buddhism that Kassapa was an extended samadhi inside a cave waiting for the next Buddha because of success in Iddhipada. I hadn't heard that about Kassapa. That's interesting. Why is it not possible for two Buddhas being in one world system? In the Theravada model of Buddhahood, it's considered to be an extremely rare and singular development, and there can only ever be one at a time. It's sort of like the impossibility of having this pure unified consciousness duplicated at once. Will you ever make videos again with Brian Rue and Panobasa? Possibly videos again with Brian Rue and Panobasa. Possibly in the future. I've thought it's best to step back from that involvement for a while, but I'm not ruling out entirely that I may join those fellows again in the future for videos. What's the difference between something being real and true? You said this about things like previous Buddhas contradicting evolutionary understanding of history. Yeah, I think people get too narrowly focused on kind of literal, what's literally true. There is a kind of a level of mythological truth that things can be true on a kind of higher level or symbolic level. And if you're narrowly focused on a uh, literal interpretation of truth, then um, it's a kind of a very narrow view. Uh, uh, but if and it's kind of the difference between, in a way, it's kind of the difference between left brain and right brain understanding. The left brain wants to be very literal and dogmatic, and the right brain is more open to imagery and illusion, and but it's not capable of grasping detail. So the two are really two ways of understanding complement each other. Is a Brahma rebirth good for practice? Yeah, it doesn't hurt. A Brahma rebirth is a result of having mastery of the jhanas. Um, it's not. It's not. I wouldn't say it's either good or bad for practice. It's a result of good practice. Ajahn, you became a monk where? Thailand. I became a monk in Thailand. If Buddha is omniscient, then it's not speaking literal truth about everything, not a breaking of precept. Well, I wouldn't. The Buddha never claimed to be omniscient. That was something that was foisted upon him posthumously. That wasn't a claim that he himself made. Okay, so I think I'll getting close to an hour. I think I'll call it there for this week, and we'll have to start something new. We've gone through the eight the four truths and the eight path factors, so I'll have to find a new project for next week. I am going to take. I'll warn you ahead of time. I am going to take a break from this in April. I won't be doing the whole month of April. I'll be offline. So, but I will return again after that. But we still have 6 weeks or so to go before that. Okay. Thank you, folks.